Welcome back to another Steelers Saturday Sit Down here with Around the 412. I am Smitty, and I am joined by the father of Sydney Jane Weeks, Tyler Weeks. How we doing, pal?
I'm doing great. A little sleep deprived. But this week has been pretty eventful, like you just mentioned. Kennedy and I had our daughter, Sydney Jane Weeks, and for anyone that is wondering, yes, absolutely 100%. She is named after Sidney Crosby. There's no hiding that. There's no way around it. I just spelled her name with an I, specifically because she was named after Sidney Crosby. If anybody's from Pittsburgh, which most of you probably are watching this, or at least are Pittsburgh related, you probably thought that. Well, I'm just confirming it. It is Sidney Crosby's namesake, Sydney Jane Weeks. But yeah, it was exciting. She was born on Tuesday. It's been a fun week so far adjusting to parenthood, because I already felt like I was pretty sleep deprived because I just naturally stayed up later anyway. And then this happened, and it's like, oh, this is a new level of sleep deprivation. So, but it's great. I mean, we're so excited to have her here, and she gets to experience her first Steelers game this week, which is great. And she's got a couple Steelers outfits that she can wear for it, so she's prepared too.
She's got the Around the 412 merch. If you follow us on Instagram,
Yeah.
Kennedy had posted it, but we reposted it on our story. Her wearing one of the onesies that I had Haley do for us. So yeah, that's awesome. Super happy for you guys. And it's funny, it was exactly 1 week after my sister gave birth to Cammie, my newest niece, like Tuesday to Tuesday, 1 week. So excited about that. But I'm sure the audience isn't necessarily tuning in just to hear us talk about kids. So talk about the Steelers matchup against the Cleveland Browns. It's interesting because this is our first repeat opponent with the Cleveland Browns not coming to Pittsburgh just 2 weeks after we went to Cleveland in that blizzard and took a loss there, which, even when we were previewing that game, talking about it, like, we both picked the Steelers to win, but said we could certainly see the path to a loss. They struggle in Cleveland. They struggle on short weeks, struggle on Thursday night, and just the elements. Those are kind of the great equalizer when there is a discrepancy in terms of the talent. When you have it almost levels the playing field when you have to play in those kind of elements. So Cleveland certainly was able to take advantage of that on Thursday night. Just on the surface, though, with this matchup, before we dive into it, I want to ask you, the first thing that I always do, and I always say this, is I try to figure out what the path to a loss is. Because this is a divisional game, is that enough for you to say you could see this one going either way? Or how differently do you view this from that short week matchup on Thursday night?
This one is different because, one, it's not a short week. I feel like that's a big factor that people are going to overlook from the last matchup. It's tough to play on Thursday when you just played on Sunday, and it doesn't matter if you're on the road or at home, divisional, non-divisional. It's going to be tough no matter what. And then when you add in all of the extra that happened with that game, being an AFC North matchup, being in the snow, on the road, it was going to be a tough matchup no matter what. I feel like the fact that you have a normal schedule, normal week of execution with practice and everything, and days that you've got to prepare for this game, and then you also have it at home. I think that is something that is going to be different in this one that you saw in that Thursday night game, because before that, it was really, even though we thought the Steelers would win, it was anybody's ball game. There was a lot more factors that playing into it than just the Steelers are a better football team. This one, I feel like it is more so these Steelers are a better football team. And if they're going to lose this game, I think that you're going to have to see more things go wrong than you even saw in that Thursday night game. I just don't think there's going to be as many external factors that are going to help Cleveland out, like having a short week and having the weather and everything like that. Now, it may be cold, but I don't think that you're going to see what you saw on Thursday night. I think that you're going to see a overmatched Steelers team when it comes to against this Browns team this time, even though I know that offensively the Browns looked impressive against the Denver Broncos, or I guess I should say Jerry Jeudy looked impressive against the Denver Broncos, and Jameis Winston looked like classic Jameis Winston with almost 500 yards of offense, or 500 yards through the air. He had 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 2 were pick sixes. I mean, is there a more classic Jameis Winston stat line than what you saw on Monday night against the Broncos. And that's another thing. I mean, it's just one day different, but they are also technically playing on a shorter week.
That's what I'm saying. They're the ones playing on short week, and it was an elevation.
Yeah, and I think that's why I think this matchup is totally different than the other one. It's hard to even compare the two. Now, when you get down to like matchups on the field and everything, you can talk about comparison. But as far as the preparation for the game, the situation of the game, I just think that this is a totally different feel than what it did 2 weeks ago.
I will say right off the bat, I guess we should talk about the injury stuff. They're going to have Alex Highsmith back in the fold. They could have Corey Trice if they want back in the fold. Excuse me. It wouldn't be injury related if Corey Trice doesn't play, is basically what I'm saying. I don't necessarily think it's a guarantee that he gets a helmet, but he's off the IR and he will be available to them for this game tomorrow. George Pickens, though, popped up late in the week with a questionable tag with a hamstring injury. Apparently happened at some point on Thursday, so he did very little on Friday. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know if this is like a truly questionable. I guess the good news is for it to happen late in the week and him not immediately be rolled out. That's either gamesmanship on their part and they know that he's out, or he's probably on the probable side, but they no longer do the probable tag. Like it's immediately questionable. So I don't know what to make of this, but that could certainly change the dynamic of this. If you don't have George Pickens available to you, they didn't run the ball very well in their first matchup. That would obviously have to change. And then you need at least one guy within that receiver room to step up. So thank goodness, a guy like Calvin Austin was able to clear the concussion protocol this week to be able to go. But still, you're going to need somebody else in that passing game to step up if George Pickens isn't available to you. I truly have no idea. Allen didn't seem to have an idea in terms of like, this is truly right now as we sit here, we don't know. I'm sure the Steelers probably have a decent idea of what's going to happen here with George this week. But as we sit here right now, like from the outside, we don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, you think if it was something like he pulled his hamstring, he would just immediately be rolled out because there's no even question of that he would be
48 hours before a game. Yeah.
There's no chance. I mean, maybe if he like slightly tweaked it, like he felt some tightness, that could be the case. But if he pulled it, did anything like that, he's out several weeks. And so maybe it is gamesmanship on their part if they already know that he's not going to be playing. But I would tend to think that this is going to be a minor injury. Otherwise, just because I feel like you don't really see someone who's going to be out several weeks. You don't really see them ruled as questionable for gamesmanship reasonings all that often, at least from the Steelers' perspective. Typically, he'd just be ruled out. Now I say that with there was a point in the season where it looked like which game was it? Was it the Ravens game or Washington, where we talked about Jaylen Warren and he didn't practice on Friday, and so that tended to think that he's not going to be out or he's going to be out on Sunday, and that wasn't the case. He was rolled as questionable. We thought that he was going to be out in that game. He ends up playing. So maybe you see something similar with this one with George Pickens, but I think when it comes to Pickens and how this is different than Jaylen Warren or almost pretty much anybody on the team, I think if you are losing George Pickens, you are losing your most important player on the field, and that's not hyperbole to me. That means he is more important than Russell Wilson. That means he's more important than TJ Watt, Patrick Queen, Cam Hayward, whoever you want to put in there. I think you are losing your most important player on the field, given the fact that he plays the receiver position. He's their clear-cut number one target in the passing game, the ability that he has when he gets the ball in his hands. And I feel like if you miss that, you are going to really struggle offensively. I just don't think that they have the depth to be able to make up for that. And credit to what Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson have done at times this season. They've had better seasons than I feel like a lot of us had expected them to have. But I just don't think that you have the capability to make up for what George Pickens is if you lose him. And so that's why I think that he needs to play in this game. I hope he plays in this game, and I hope this is just a minor injury because I genuinely think that George Pickens right now is probably the most important Steeler on the team.
Yeah, and that's not saying best, but I agree with that statement because I think that you have the depth at the other spots where you have your best players to be able to supplant a loss, at least for a period of time. Like if we saw TJ Watt go down for a game, we know we have Nick Herbig, we have Alex Highsmith, and we have Preston Smith. If we don't have George Pickens for a game and all those guys have to take a step up, all of a sudden, either Scotty Miller or Brandon Johnson are getting a helmet. Mike Williams is going to have to try to replicate some of what you're missing with George Pickens. And then you got Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, probably a lot more tight end utilization. And then obviously with the backs. And if the backs were to have a day as receivers like they did against Cincinnati, then maybe, if we were playing Cincinnati again and you didn't have George Pickens, you could probably get by with how bad that defense is. Cleveland's defense, not quite as bad. I don't necessarily think they're a good defense, but I think they're an average defense. Let's go through some of the numbers here just to see how they stack up with each other. The only thing right now, offensively or defensively, and this is just like the baseline stats, the surface level stuff, that Cleveland is better at than Pittsburgh, their passing game on offense. They average 226.8 yards per game. And that's not even necessarily, I'd have to go and look at it from an efficiency standpoint. I don't have that number in front of me, but also we've seen this slowly increase since Russell Wilson entered the lineup. Who knows what this is going to look like by the end of the year, but right now, the Browns 13th in the league in passing yards per game, the Steelers 20th in the league in passing yards per game. But everything else, yards per game, Steelers 11th, 362.3 yards per game. Browns are 21st. Rushing yards per game, 133 for the Steelers, 87.3 for the Browns, which is 29th in the NFL. The Steelers are 9th. Points per game. The Steelers, after last week, now a top 10 scoring offense in the NFL, 24.7 points per game. The Browns are 29th, 18.2 points per game. Third down percentage, Steelers 39.2, which is 13th in the league. The Browns, dead last third down offense, 29.2%. So we'll just stick with the offensive side. We'll go to the defense here in a little bit. Offensively, now, like I just said, Steelers 11th in yards per game, and they are a top 10 scoring offense now. What a jump it's been. And this is there's no better thing that I could circle here in terms of giving a kudos to Arthur Smith, because I understand, like, we can go back and at times through every single game talk about the personnel decisions and question them, or a play call here and there. But this is not, you look at the personnel group that they have on the offensive side of the ball. This is not an offense that I think before the season started, we would be like, yeah, they're going to be a top 10 scoring offense. We were asking for like 18th, and we'd be good with the defense that we have. So to see them now as a top 10 scoring offense, I think it's been a heck of a job by Arthur Smith, getting the guys in the right positions. But also, I don't want to take credit completely away from the players. As much as I think there is a lack of talent on the offensive side, cap tip to those guys for maximizing their opportunities and being now a top 10 scoring offense.
For sure. This is not your daddy's Steelers offense. And I guess that's a wrong phrase, but that's the closest phrase I have, because you look at the past two offensive coordinators that we've had. I won't go back to Todd Haley, because Todd Haley was the offensive coordinator for the Killer Bees era. Offense was electric back then. But whenever you had Randy Fichtner and Matt Canada, you just haven't seen this type of scoring offense from the Steelers that a lot of people had hoped, considering some of the talent that we've had throughout those tenures. And now, even with the lesser talent, like you mentioned, he's able to get the most out of his players. And I feel like that is a captive to the coaching more than anything, when you're able to do more with less in terms of talent. I think that Arthur Smith has done a really good job. And like you mentioned, sure, you can nitpick plays or certain personnel issues any to a game-by-game basis. But overall, I think that this is night and day different than what we've gotten the past 5 years from either of the other coordinators. I think that it is so much better from what we've seen, and also credit to what he's able to do whenever Russell Wilson took over. I know I just mentioned that I said George Pickens is the most important player, but I mean, this ship is not going without Russell Wilson the way it is, and I don't want to discredit him at all. I think that he's done a really good job since taking over for Justin Fields, and I think that the passing game has really opened up, and you've been able to see, and this is a credit to Russell Wilson as well. I mentioned how Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin are getting more involved than what I at least initially would have thought as much in this season. And I think that really started to be the case whenever Russell Wilson took over. You started to see the ball being distributed more. And we talked about how when Justin Fields was the quarterback, guys were open. Justin wasn't necessarily finding them, and Russell is finding them. He's distributing the ball efficiently, and I think that is something that is going hand in hand with Arthur Smith as the offensive coordinator. I just think it is a perfect pair for right now what the Steelers need and getting the most out of these players.
I think it's just been a great marriage in terms of the willingness to take the deep shots when they're there. I don't think that was there with Justin. I mean, all credit to Justin. They were 4-2 with him, made a bunch of plays with his legs to win games, and was, able to at least do that. They were effective in the red zone because of his legs, certainly made enough plays to win. I don't think he didn't sink the ship. He didn't turn the football over. That was, to me, the best thing that he did, is because he's been turnover prone in the past. He was able to negate those plays in his time as the starter. Chad says, don't you dare give Arthur Smith credit, even if he deserves it. We can't afford another Arthur Smith head coaching run. Did you see his name's actually popped up as a dark horse candidate to watch for the Jets opening?
Really?
Which would certainly be interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I it's hard for me to believe, just 1 year away from head coaching, he'd be right back in the saddle. But with the job he's doing in Pittsburgh, I think that he warrants a look. My prediction right now is it doesn't happen. I think he stays at least the offensive coordinator here for another season. I'm not saying he's going to coach out all the 3 years on his current deal, assuming that was a 3-year contract they gave him. It's typically how they do with coordinators. But I for sure see next year being the offensive coordinator as the Steelers, and then maybe he'll get a head coaching look. But I guess it just depends on the amount of openings, right? Like Adam Schefter was on Pat McAfee's show, talk about like somewhere between 7, 8, maybe even 10 potential openings this year. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't completely roll it out.
Yeah, it would be disappointing for sure based off of what we've seen from the offense. But it's hard to say whether it would be bad or good for the Steelers. I mean, not necessarily good.
I mean,
how bad it would be.
Matt's saying until we win the Super Bowl. Hey, if we win this, I don't care. Yeah, great. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I'd love for him to stick around, but if we win the Super Bowl, that's all I needed.
Yeah.
So
when you win a Super Bowl, it gives you a buffer for you don't really care what happens to your team over the next year or so. Like even if your team is like subpar than what they were the year before, you just won the Super Bowl. So you have that year of celebration, that hangover year.
This shirt would be really outdated. This is a vintage shirt with Jerome on it from Brandon
5.
Butler. Shout out. Yeah. Then they got 6. And now they're about to have 7 in Matt's scenario here. So this shirt would be very outdated. Anyways, back to this game here. Appreciate the comments, by the way. Keep this coming. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you have not.
Let me ask you something before we move on to the game. Just because we're talking about Arthur Smith, future of him with the Steelers and how it's affecting the offense. How much do you think, if Arthur Smith would left the Steelers and the Steelers were still interested, how much do you think that would affect a Russell Wilson extension if he were to leave?
That's a good question. The thing, Arthur was in place before Russ this time. So I wonder, like, would Russ have a say? Like, would that be part of the allure for him coming back in that case? Like, he didn't before. Arthur was in place and you brought in Russ. But then if Russ is here and you don't have an offensive coordinator, would part of the allure to bringing Russ being brought back be, he can kind of, I don't want to say him handpick, but have a say in who the next offensive coordinator is? That's a good question. I really don't. I thought you were going to ask, are you saying from the Steelers' perspective or Russ's perspective wanting to come back, or both?
Russ's perspective wanting to come back. Like,
oh, okay.
Do I think that, well, I guess kind of hand in hand. Do you think that if the Steelers are offering Russ an extension, does he have not necessarily like a vote, but he can express his opinion on who he would like as a coordinator? But also, if Arthur Smith is not here, is that going to affect Russell Wilson's decision on if he wants to even be in Pittsburgh longer term?
I don't want this to happen, obviously, but the Jets is the job that's been mentioned. There's been talk about them moving on from Aaron Rodgers. How crazy would it be if Arthur Smith went to the Jets? Russ will end up signing with the Jets.
Was the Jets one of the teams that Russ was going to visit, or was that with the Giants?
Giants and Raiders were the other two that were talked about.
Okay. That'd be wild.
But anyway, no, I really hadn't thought about the idea. Like, I assume Russ is going to be back. Don't ask me what the number is going to be, but I assume that Russ is going to be back on a short-term extension after this year. I honestly hadn't thought about like the hand-in-hand stuff with Arthur Smith, though, because if he moves on after just one season, you bring Russ back for 3 seasons, say, that'd be interesting. I think you got to have Russ be part of the decision, though. I mean, even if I understand he doesn't have necessarily like the vested time with the Steelers, but like the amount of time that he has in this, like I feel like he might as well have been with the Steelers for a long time with the amount of say that he would have in that position.
My official way too early prediction: 3 years, $54 million. Or no, 3 years, $74 million.
I was going to say, wait a minute,
$28 million a year.
So yeah, like you look at quarterback contracts, and you could certainly make the case for it being 30 plus. Like, and people would think that's crazy, but
84
then you
million.
go and look
My
at
math is so
people
off.
making it.
It's 3 years, 84 million. Would be 28
Okay,
million a year.
well, okay. What the point is, you wanted 28 million per.
Yeah.
So 30 million seems on the surface like it'd be crazy, but then you go and look at contracts, quarterback contracts, and it's like, I mean,
It's not
that
that
he could
crazy.
certainly, yeah. But I've been of the mindset, and I don't know why I feel this way. This is just like total vibes. I think he's going to get between 26 and 28.
Okay.
Per.
We're
And I've
similar
been saying
mindsets
that.
then.
Yeah. I think, but the big thing is, like, throw whatever numbers you want out there. It really doesn't matter. It's about the guaranteed money. They could give him 3 years, like $120 million. But if it's like 20 million, 20 million, and then like 80 million, that in that third year is not guaranteed. You're just playing with monopoly money. Who cares what that number is?
Yeah, that's true.
So I'll be curious to see how they want to structure it, but I certainly believe as of right now, something gets done with that. So that's where I'm at with it. All right, back to this game at hand, though, because we got a lot of business to take care of before we're talking about a Russell Wilson extension or potentially Arthur Smith moving on. I want to talk about the defensive side of the ball now and just how they stack up. The Browns, not as good as they were last year, that's for sure. 365.8 yards given up per game. They're 23rd in the NFL. Oh, and God, in the NFL, there, 221 yards passing allowed per game. They're 19th. 128.6 rushing yards allowed per game. They're 23rd there. 25.7 points per game, 26th. And third down percentage, they're actually above average there, 35.3%, which is 11th in the NFL. The Steelers defensively, 7th in yards per game, 327.6. They allow 220.5 passing yards per game. They're actually 18th. Their rushing yards per game, they're fourth best, 90.5. Sixth in points, 18.7 points per game. And then this is where they make their money right here, allowing just first down completion on third down 34% of the time, which is fourth best in the NFL. So when you look at these two defenses, obviously one is very good, one is very bad. And I'm curious to see how different the plan of attack is now, because I think the Browns played them defensively very different than they would have in better conditions. Mm-hmm. I think that they realized that the Steelers weren't going to be able to operate the same way as they do. They only played 6-man coverage snaps in that game on Thursday night. That's insane.
Wow.
So they were basically just daring the Steelers to take those deep shots because they didn't trust that they could make those plays happen in those conditions. So I'm curious to see how different the plan of attack is now. They just saw what the Steelers did to Cincinnati, taking what they gave them. I mean, if you go back and watch that game, like, there were some deep shots, certainly. They were calculated, but a lot of it was just taking what Cincinnati was giving them over the middle of the field. I mean, you look at the receiving numbers for the backs in that game. Najee Harris had 6 catches. Jalen Warren had like 6 catches. Cordell Patterson even had 3 or 4 catches in that game. They were just dinking and dunking them the entire way down the field, given what Cincinnati would take or would give them. So I'm curious to see in this one what's changed about Cleveland's plan of attack, and what is your mindset going into this? Like, how different do you think Cleveland's going to defend them now?
Well, I certainly think that the weather is going to play a factor into all of this. I mean, Sunday in Pittsburgh is supposed to be 45 degrees and sunny is the high, and that is going to be way contrastedly different than what they were doing just a couple weeks ago on that Thursday night game. I think that the Steelers offensively are going to be able to move the ball down the field with more efficiency, kind of like what you saw against Cincinnati. Now, I don't think Cleveland is necessarily as bad as Cincinnati defensively. Not many teams in the NFL are, but I still think that they're going to be able to find holes in the offense. And I think that the game plan for the Steelers against the Browns defense is kind of like what you just mentioned. Just take what they give you. If they're going to give you in the middle of the field, being able to like dunk and dime down the field with your running backs in the pass game out of the backfield, I think that is perfectly fine. I think that you're probably going to see more man coverage in this game, especially if George Pickens is playing. But I just think that it's the weather is going to play a huge factor into how the defense is going to prepare for the Steelers. And I just think the Steelers, based off what we saw in Cincinnati, that can get their mojo going more. We haven't seen it. We didn't see a good offensive performance from them in several weeks. You saw it against Cincinnati, and I get it. It was Cincinnati's defense. They were terrible. But having a performance like that can carry over from week to week and instill some more confidence in your offense. And against a defense that isn't all that great either, I think that they definitely overperformed when they played them on Thursday night. I think that there is an advantage to be taken there. The thing that I want to see from the Steelers going against the Browns defense is a better effort up front. I thought that the Browns, their front seven, especially the defensive line, they just ate up the Steelers' offensive line the entire night on Thursday. Specifically, I want to see a better defense, or I guess, is it a defensive plan if it's on the offensive side of the ball? A better plan to block Myles Garrett than they were on Thursday night football, because I feel like the little chips that you had on Myles Garrett weren't working. He was in single coverage too much on Dan Moore Jr., and I feel like he took advantage of it. Obviously, he had a great night that night, was able to say what he said after the game. He's number one, all that. And when you get to have a night like he did, you get to talk, but now you get to back it up coming back to Pittsburgh. I think that the Steelers need to prepare better on the offensive line against this defensive front for the Browns, because that's somewhere where I think that the Steelers offense has an advantage over the Browns defense. I still feel like there's a chance that you could see an advantage from the Browns defensive line over the Steelers offense if they don't improve from their last matchup, because quite frankly, the Browns took them to lunch and they were just taking them over and over again. Offensive line for the Steelers had no whereabouts in that game.
I will say, I think that a big part of that was for a lot of those guys. Well, not a lot of those guys. For two of those guys, it was their first short week.
Yeah.
And then for, Broderick, who's just in his second year, though, he's looked a lot better as of late. But I think that was part of, like, Zach Frazier talked about that. Like, this is one that he's wanted to get back, like, because of his performance specifically on the Thursday night. And when I looked at the way that him and Mason McCormick played in that game, I don't want to let them off the hook that much, but I really think it was two rookies just realizing, like, oh, this is what it's like on a short week, and not necessarily being up to the task. And I'm not saying like mentally or anything like that, just like physically, I don't know that they were prepared to go on that short week and perform the way that they have prior to and also since. So I really think and would like to think that they're going to be much better in this game. And certainly the way that Zach Frazier has talked about it, I expect them to be better. I don't want to completely do a 180 here, but I want to get to this comment just before a bunch more come in and I forget about it. Tristan said, do you guys think Judy's 235 was something that Cleveland did or more of an indictment on the Broncos defense? The Broncos defense has been awesome, so I don't necessarily think it was that. But I will say in that game, they were missing Riley Moss, their other corner opposite of Patrick Surtain, who's also been very good this year, which, like, you think you can get away without having him for a game or two or whatever. It's not like Riley Moss is some superstar, but he has been very good this year. And it's more so about, it's almost like when you lose, I'm not comparing him to George Pickens, but we just talked about how different it is, mainly because of what's behind him.
Yeah.
Levi Wallace was playing significant snaps in that game.
Levi Wallace is buns, people.
Because of Riley Moss not playing, and he saw a lot of Jerry Jeudy. And I think that eventually they should have corrected the game plan. But hey, credit to Cleveland for getting that matchup a ton. But Jerry Jeudy balled out in that game, and it was a ton of yak too. Like, it wasn't like, like just deep shots where he was like, he got a ton of yak in that game. And credit to Jameis for putting him in those positions as well. Those two have had a great connection since he took over. Jerry Jeudy's been one of the best receivers in the league. He jumped from 30th to 5th in receiving yards after that performance on Monday night. So I do think I'm curious to see what the game plan is for him. He's another one of those receivers where, like, I'm not comparing him to Jamar Chase, but I think of the type of receiver. I think he could give Joey some issues, the type of receiver that he is. So I'm curious to see what the plan of attack is there. Is it kind of just like it was, and Cedric Tillman's not going for Cleveland, which is massive. I think he's their second best receiver behind Jerry Jeudy. And that's the guy I would have said Joey should see a lot of. So do you kind of just let Joey line up with whoever's going to line up on that side of the field? Or do you have a specific game plan attack for Jerry Jeudy? I'm curious to see what the Steelers do, because I don't know that I would just have Joey shadow around with him.
I wouldn't. I would kind of consider it similar to how we talked about Jamar Chase. Kind of let the matchups unfold the way that they are. Don't have Joey just cover him the entire game, because I mean, realistically, Jerry can play out of the slot sometimes. He's going to fall into the slot. I don't think that that's going to happen.
Oh boy. But do you want Cam Sutton covering him ever in man coverage specifically? If you're playing in zone,
not. That's, I feel like they got to probably use a lot of zone this week to account for Jerry Jeudy, because that's although I got to say, like, Denver was playing a lot of zone too, and Jerry Jeudy was still finding open space. So sometimes you're going to get burnt, but I think that you're better suited to not just have Jerry Jeudy being covered by Joey Porter Jr. the entire game, but at the same time, probably depends on the officiating crew whether it's going to be beneficial for Joey or not to play the way he has been. Because I feel like have
you looked at those splits with his penalties this year?
Well, I know he had 6 last game.
6, 4 that were actually accepted.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I'm not saying he has to figure out a way to adjust to the officiating crews. But if you look at his penalties this year, I think he has 4 more than anybody else in the league right now. But if you look at them, it's like 3, 3, 0, 0. Like it depends on certain games. Yeah, certain games he has a bunch, in other games he has a clean slate. So I think it's more about him and he has to be able to do this, but he hasn't yet been able to adjust to the officiating crew calling things more. You're going to have crews that are more, calling those types of penalties. You're going to have crews that call a lot more holding calls than other crews. So he's been the victim, I think, of officiating crews calling those more tightly. And again, I think he's got to find a way to work around that, clearly, but he hasn't yet. And one of my bold predictions for this week, I'll just throw it out there right now, is he's a clean slate on Sunday. But one of the things I want to mention with that is I'm curious to see this officiating crew, because there's been a lot of talk this week between the two teams. Like, George really igniting some conversation, talking about Greg Newsome, who he does not know, apparently, despite sending him a DM in 2019. I have a theory on that, by the way, which I'll get into in a second. But igniting some conversation, I'm curious if the NFL's kind of reached out to the officiating crew saying, like, we got to we don't want to let this thing get out of control early. So I'm curious to see how tightly called this one is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I feel like this is the first time in a while where, and this has kind of been a buildup over the last several seasons, but I feel like this is the first season in a while where I actually feel like the Steelers-Browns rivalry has some angst behind it, because for the longest time it was just the Steelers beating up with the Browns, big brother, little brother, and I'm sure that it was more of a rival before Ben Roethlisberger showed up, or even before the when it was 70s, 80s, 90s. But from our entire lifetimes, the Browns-Steelers rivalry has just been kind of like the throw-off rivalry, and we've just had Ravens and Steelers, and then kind of Bengals Steelers for a little bit there in the 2010s with all the whole Vontaze Burfict thing. I mean, they're obviously a divisional rival, but it's a little different. But this is the first time where I'd say there is probably more angst behind the Browns Steelers rivalry, specifically this season, than what we're seeing from Steelers Ravens. And I know that the Ravens, we only played them once so far. We've got that other game it's in the Baltimore. Things can change by then. But the fact that these games are happening 2 weeks apart, the things that have been said on both sides by both teams, I just feel like you're seeing more actual rivalry talk from this rivalry than you have in several years, maybe ever, from what we've seen.
And I think there's only a couple, like 2 factors basically that are creating that. It's George Pickens in the Cleveland defensive backs, and it's Myles Garrett and TJ Watt in that conversation that is going to go on forever, debating those 2 players. And I think the fact that they're on opposite sides here is the reason that conversation happens. So yeah, I mean, I feel like the rivalry's kind of always been, because I feel like rivalries more so than just the play on the field are driven by fan bases.
Sure.
So I think because of the fan trash talk that's constantly happening, the fact that the Browns have won that playoff game back in 2020, and that's still, a shining moment for them, and gets brought up anytime that they're playing each other every single week.
It's their only Super Bowl win.
I feel like that is a big reason why. So I've never felt like the rivalry is necessarily gone away. But I think those two things are why it feels like there is so much hatred right now between the two teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that's a good point, and that's why I was saying how it's kind of built up the last several seasons. But for a while, even if the fan rivalry is just the rivalry from the fans and not as much on the field, which it's always going to be on the field, but like there's levels to this. So like Steelers Ravens is always at a different level, but like this year so far, I'd argue that based off what we've seen on the field, what we've seen off the field, what players are saying, and fans. Like I would say that the Steelers-Browns rivalry this season alone is rivaling what the Steelers-Ravens rivalry regularly is.
There's a lot of hate. Yeah, with the Ravens, I feel like it's strictly the 60 minutes of play on the field. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, there was a lot of guys that got up for that one. Patrick Queen, Deshaun Elliott going against the former team. Deshaun Elliott on a podcast with Marlon Humphrey the week of talking about it. But yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with that. All right, let's get back to this game, though, specifically maybe get into some predictions that we have, or if we haven't talked about any team matchup stuff that you have on your mind right now. Is there anything that we didn't touch on yet that you feel like is going to be a big factor in this game?
Well, something that we talked about a couple weeks ago after this game happened on the Steelers around the 412 show is that we didn't really see anything from TJ Watt in this first matchup. And we had the conversation, should the Steelers move TJ Watt around more instead of just sticking him on that left defensive end side? And I think that we're only going to see him be on that left side still. We saw that last week against Cincinnati. You saw it through basically his entire career. I don't think they're going to move him around, but that makes me curious. What is the matchup going to look like with Jack Conklin? Because honestly, Jack Conklin won that matchup, and he had one-on-ones with TJ Watt, and he was winning them. And I feel like that is going to be a big motivator for TJ in this game. The fact that he kind of, I don't want to necessarily got embarrassed, but in a game where you have TJ Watt and Myles Garrett taking the field at not the same time, but on the same field the same night, and one got advantage of the other, I feel like that's going to be a big motivator for TJ going against Jack Conklin again on that tackle spot. And the reason I say that I don't think they're going to move him around is obviously they just don't have a tendency to, but also you're getting Alex Highsmith back. And typically when you have those two guys, it's not even a question. They're just going to be sitting at their normal spots. But that's another matchup that I'm curious to see how it goes on Sunday, because I feel like you're going to see a motivated TJ Watt, a pissed off TJ Watt because of his performance, what you saw in Cleveland. He is going to probably want to have a game like he did against Cincinnati in this one.
I don't think that you'll see him a ton rushing over the left tackle. But what I will say is like you said, you got Alex Highsmith back. You still have Nick Herbig. You got Preston Smith as well if you want to use him in this way. I think we see TJ rush over the center a few times because they can put three edge rushers on the field at the same time. I think it's mainly going to be Nick Herbig when they go into those three edge rusher sets, and they'll have him rush from different spots. But I think a couple times, just to throw them off, I think you'll see TJ line up over in the A gap a couple times.
Yeah, I mean that would be a good game plan. I think mixing it up sometimes is good for the Steelers front. I feel like it's so standard the way the standard is the standard, but it's so standard for how they normally are setting up their defensive front that I guess you're relying on the skill of the individual player than the actual defensive scheme, and that's if you're continuing to do that, which more often than not, the Steelers defense is so skilled that they're able to win those matchups. But if you get the better of a team, like the Steelers and Browns 2 weeks ago, I said on both sides of the ball, whether it was the Browns defense or the Browns O-line, they were winning the line of scrimmage. So you're not always going to win those battles. This is a game where I think the Steelers, not just TJ, but specifically TJ, but the entire defensive line as a whole is also on the flip side of what I mentioned about the O-line. They're going to want to win this battle back because, quite frankly, they lost that battle whenever they played a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that is a big question, is how is TJ going to respond in this one? He's got to have an answer. He got to punch back. Brian made me laugh here with this comment that he sent a couple minutes ago, but just now getting to it. Is Mike Williams really on the Steelers, or is that my imagination? Actually, my bold prediction for this week, I guess this could be a transition. We can get into that stuff. Is Mike Williams catches a touchdown this week, and that was a bold prediction for me before even the George Pickens thing popped up. I'd like to think that George is going to go for what you said. I think if it's anything significant, if he pulled his hamstring on Thursday at practice and then was limited, well, he wouldn't have even been limited Friday. Like if it happened Thursday, clearly it was just like tweaking it. So I'd like to think he's going to be able to go. Is he going to be 100% though? Is he going to play as many snaps as he usually does? I don't know. And if for whatever reason he were to not go, obviously Mike Williams steps into that role because he's the only one that can do some of the things that George does in terms of being a deep threat down the field at the second and third levels of a defense. So my offensive bold prediction is Mike Williams catches a touchdown this week. But yeah, haven't necessarily
seen
on
one reception because right now he's right with one TD.
Yeah. Okay. If you to go along with that, I think he has multiple catches this week. I'll expand upon my bold prediction there. I get it because you traded a 5th round pick for him straight up. It wasn't, a pick swap or anything like that. You gave up a draft pick to get Mike Williams here, and so far he's got 1 catch. Really hasn't been targeted a ton. So I get why people are like, where's this guy at? Where's this guy at? I will say, and this isn't me like necessarily making, trying to justify anything here because I understand the frustration. I think there's a lot of times going back where I've been like, okay, this isn't going to show in the box score, but this team did something defensively because of Mike Williams that led to somebody else making a play. Calvin Austin's touchdown against Cincinnati was because of Mike Williams clearing out. There's just a lot of plays where Mike Williams isn't necessarily getting the ball, but he's doing something, enforcing something with the coverage that somebody else does. And I'm not saying there isn't another player that could have done that or anything like that. I'm just saying I know that he's not contributing in the box score right now, but I don't necessarily think he's been bad. I'm just waiting like everybody else for more of those opportunities for him to come.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And we kind of talked about that when they traded for him, is that even whenever you are having somebody that's not getting the targets or the catches necessarily, you are having somebody that can take away a safety. They can take away a side of the field necessarily just because of the type of receiver that they are, not necessarily because of the stats they're putting up, but that's just someone that you have to account for.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if Boston was getting here late. Congrats on the little one, Tyler from Boston.
Yeah, thank you to everybody that's said congrats. By the way, I've noticed them all come in, but
hey, Hayden became a father 8 months ago. So, wonder what that life's been like.
Congrats to you.
Yeah. But anyway, okay. So you got my bold predictions basically with it, or one of them. I'm sorry. I guess I'll just give my other one, then you can go. Defensively, I said Joey Porter Jr. isn't going to have any penalties. And then if you want another bold prediction, this will play into my score, but I'm not going to give my score just quite yet until Tyler does his bold predictions. I think this one turns into a laugher. I think by about, I don't know, some point in the third quarter, we're not even questioning the result of this game anymore.
I like it. I would love to watch a Steeler game like that where I don't have to sweat out the second half. I'm surprised a little bit that you're not saying a Minkah Fitzpatrick interception.
I can't do it. I'm not going back to that.
But at the same time, this is probably the most likely week that it could happen.
It is. That's why I'm mad that I've used it before, because I should have been waiting for James Winston is going to do everything in his power to end this Minkah Fitzpatrick interception drought. I promise you.
I mean, you got to think that how many turnovers would it have to be for it to say it's bold for Jameis? If you're just going total turn,
three's not bold. Three's not bold.
Three is regular. Like that's like a walk in the park for Jameis. But with those 3 interceptions, sometimes he throws 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. That is like, I gotta say, Jameis Winston to me, if you have no like rooting interest
in the game,
no skin in the game, he is the most entertaining player to watch in the football. Like in the NFL, I don't think there's a player that I root for more than Jameis Winston from a viewership standpoint because of how electric his games are offensively and defensively from him.
Somebody said, it was Darius Butler when he was on Pat McAfee's show. He said, if you're on the field, you got to be ready. Anybody on the field could catch the ball. That includes the offense and defense. Defensive linemen, linebackers, maybe one of the offensive linemen at times. Like, you got to just be ready to catch the ball if Jameis Winston's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely wild. All right, my bold predictions. I'm gonna say that we see a bounce back week from Najee Harris. We're gonna get a 100-yard performance from him.
Yeah, just
Um,
2.8 yards per carry in the first matchup.
Yeah, don't think that it's going to sit well with him. But I do think that the offensive line should perform better in this game than they did on that Thursday night game. And I think that's going to pay like big factors into what they're going to be able to do on the ground. I think that he bounces back, gets over 100 yards on the ground. Defensively, I mean, it would be so chalk for me to say that Minkah Fitzpatrick interception because you're not doing it. But I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that Deshaun Elliott gets another one. And he's going to keep adding to his total. I mean, he's what 5 on the season right now.
Oh, wait, you mean Dante Jackson?
Or yeah, Dante Jackson. Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
I was mixing up the two. Dante Jackson is going to get another interception.
And he's got 5 right now.
He's got 5 right now. He's going to get 6 on the year after this one. And
I feel like right now, like Pro Bowl voting is what it is. He's 3rd right now among corners for Pro Bowl voting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's because of the interception numbers, so I get it. But like, don't get me wrong, I think he's been good. But I mean, that's pretty wild. That's pretty wild. He's not the 3rd best.
Wonder how many Pro Bowl votes Deontay Johnson has. Just saying.
Probably some from himself.
But also, this isn't necessarily a bold prediction, but I think it's going to happen. Like I think that you're going to see at least 3 turnovers from Jameis in this game. Like I think if you're only going to see 1 in the air, I think that there's a chance you see multiple strip sacks. Like I feel it in my bones that the Browns are not going to be able to replicate what they did a couple weeks ago. They relatively took care of the football for Jameis Winston standards in that game against the Steelers. They were able to move the football, and despite being 1 of 10 on 3rd down in that Thursday night football game, they were 4 of 4 on 4th down, including a touchdown on 4th down, a Jameis Winston run. I don't think that you're going to get that. I think that the Steelers defense is going to be more efficient on 4th down if they want to go for it, but they were already efficient on 3rd down against the Browns. I just don't think that you're going to see the capitalizing from the Browns offense like you saw in that Thursday night football game. And I feel like the Browns in this one are going to have to just do more than what they did in the Thursday night football game. I think the Steelers are just going to overbear them. And I think offensively they're going to jump out in front with this thing and not look back in it. Yeah,
just 1 pick and 1 fumble for Jameis in that Thursday night game. Just two turnovers. Yeah, Thursday night football the last time. So you're saying take the over.
Take the over. I mean, if you're setting a line at 2.5, take that over. I think you're going to get multiple turnovers in this game, and I think like you, like this one could get ugly. I mean, this one could be. What year was it? Whenever they came here with Baker and they just blew out the Browns, was it like 2021?
2020. No,
or 2020?
COVID year. Yeah,
2020. I mean,
it's like the Steelers were 6-0 and the Browns, I think, were 5-1 coming into that game. Like it was. Okay. Romo and Nance were on the call. Yeah.
I think it could be a game like that.
Make a pick 6 in that one.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think it could be similar to that type of game. I feel like the Steelers are going to be very motivated. Score prediction. I'm going to say the Steelers win this one very handedly. Obviously, we're kind of hinting at that the entire time. But I just don't see a way that the Browns are going to win this one. I really think there would have to be a big collapse. Unlike what we saw against Thursday Night Football, like there was so many external factors playing into that one. This one would have to be a bigger collapse from the Steelers if they were going to lose this game. I think they win it comfortably. I think they win. Final score, I'll say 34-10.
Okay, I'm at 33-13. The Steelers win this one. I don't see the path. Like I saw the path on that short week on Thursday night in those conditions. I don't see the path here for the Browns. I think it would take, like you're saying, it. When I say collapse too, I don't even mean the defense not performing the way that we think they should, or the offense, all of a sudden have a drop off after the performance they just had at Cincinnati. Like I don't even mean that.
Like it would take a muff
turnovers.
Punt. Yeah, it would take a return kick, like a fluke, like a kickoff return. It would take stuff that is external from either side of the ball just playing bad, and it would just take shooting yourself in the foot in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't
because I think that you can afford to play bad on at least one side of the ball and still win this game. It can't be both, but I think that if, like, say your defense is not coming out to play, based off what we saw from the offense last week, you know there's the capability of getting them in a shootout. If you got in a shootout, they can do it. I think that you can win this football game if one side is not playing up to snuff. But if you're just shooting yourselves in the foot, like turning over the football, muff punt, return kicks, block field goals, anything like that, that's where you start to get into the like fluky, so to speak, territory where that's where you could see the Steelers losing this one. But I just don't think it's going to happen.
Williams says 27-13 Steelers, and then Brian brings up a good point here in one tier. Need a big week with the meat grinder coming up. Yeah, Philly, Baltimore, Kansas City within an 11-day span. So certainly this is a big, and I think it's going to be treated like that. I think that's the mindset too, is they understand what's ahead of them. This is one they got to have. So, okay, we're not doing it, but Monongahela Mike will call it. Steelers 30, Browns 17. We get to make a pick 6.
So he took it even further. Not just an interception.
Oh, yeah, pick 6. Yeah. You're right. There it is. Drop your predictions if you are in the live chat right now or watching back afterwards. Of course, we appreciate everybody that joins us for these. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell as well. Yeah, I don't know. Follow us on everything at Around the 412 and check out the description. We got all of our links, including year 7 of rocking around the 412. And bam, it's this week. 2 days, or I'm sorry, actually tomorrow, I'm going to deliver the stuff to the Salvation Army after the Steeler game. And then 1 week from today will be the last day to donate to the mission in general. I actually just got another family from the Central Valley School District, 2 kids. So excited about that. 2 more kids added to the total. You guys know the numbers. I've talked about them before. It's going to be 65 now this year, I believe, or I'm sorry, 66 this year, 170 total since we started the mission back in 2018. So that's awesome stuff, and appreciate everybody that donates. A lot of prizes coming the way of the people that donate. 2 Game Changer shirts, 2 of our shirts, an autographed Pat Fryermuth jersey, autographed Jared Jones jersey, Steelers jersey of choice, Pirates jersey of choice, Penguins tickets, an autographed Steelers 16x20 print, 21 autographs on this thing by people that are or have been within the organization in some capacity, players, front office personnel, coaches, a bunch of different autographs on there. And then a James Daniels game-worn visor worn against these Browns last year on Monday Night Football week 2. So be sure to donate if you haven't yet. We appreciate everybody that does. At the very least, share the mission, because you never know whose eyes and ears you can get on it. Again, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. For Smitty, for Tyler, this has been another Steelers Saturday Sit Down, and we'll see you next week.